You know what's interesting about people who are great at saving money? They often end up poorer than people who were far less disciplined than them. And that sounds backwards. It sounds like it should be the other way around. Someone who saves consistently, who never overspends, who tracks every dollar, they should be winning. And on some level they are. But there's a quiet financial trap that almost no one talks about, and it catches some of the most financially responsible people you'll ever meet. They save, they just never invest. And psychologically, that gap between saving and investing is one of the most fascinating puzzles in all of behavioral finance. Because it's not about knowledge, it's not even really about money. It's about what's happening inside the brain of someone who feels deeply, genuinely uncomfortable with the idea of letting go of control over their cash. Let's actually look at what's going on here. The first thing researchers identify in people who save but never invest is something called loss aversion. Now, this isn't just a personality trait, it's a documented cognitive bias that psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent decades studying. And what they found was striking. The psychological pain of losing something is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the exact same thing. Not slightly more painful, twice. So here's what that looks like in practice. You put $2,000 into the market. It drops to $1,500. That $500 loss doesn't feel like losing $500 to your brain. It feels like losing $1,000. The emotional weight is disproportionate to the actual number. And your nervous system, which was built to protect you from threats, has no way of distinguishing between a bear market and a predator in the dark. It just knows something bad might happen. And here's the part that makes this so psychologically sticky. Your brain will keep running that calculation even when you're not consciously thinking about it. You sit down to watch something on TV, and somewhere in the background, that threat detection system is quietly calculating potential loss. And so the savings account stays full, and the investment account stays empty. But there's something deeper happening than just the fear of markets, because most people who save and never invest aren't afraid of money in general. They love money, they're good with money, they've built habits around money. The issue is that saving and investing feel completely different at the neurological level. Saving feels like keeping, investing feels like releasing. When you deposit money into a savings account, your brain registers that as a gain. You had the money and now you still have the money, just in a different place. The sense of control stays intact. But the moment you move that money into an investment, your brain doesn't register it the same way. It registers it as a potential loss because the number can now go down. And even though rationally you know the long-term trajectory of markets, that rational knowledge is no match for a nervous system that has been wired over hundreds of thousands of years to prioritize avoiding immediate loss over gaining future reward. Psychologists call this present bias, and it's one of the reasons retirement accounts are so hard to build voluntarily. The benefit of investing today feels abstract, remote, theoretical. But the discomfort of watching your available balance shrink is immediate. It's now, and now always wins. Now here's something that complicates this further. For a large number of people who save compulsively but never invest, the pattern doesn't actually start in the stock market. It starts in childhood. Financial therapists who work with this specific pattern consistently find that their clients grew up in environments where money felt unstable. Maybe there were conversations at the dinner table about bills that couldn't be paid. Maybe income was unpredictable. Maybe they watched a parent lose something, a job, a business, a house, and the lesson their developing brain absorbed was very simple and very logical. The only safe money is the money you can see and touch and count. Researchers describe this as a financial blueprint, a subconscious set of beliefs about money that gets wired into us long before we have any real understanding of economics. And the thing about blueprints is they don't update automatically. The child who learned that money disappears grows into an adult who grips every dollar with both hands, not because they're irrational, but because their nervous system is still running the same protective software it installed 30 years ago. One financial therapist described her clients with this pattern as people who have enormous amounts of money sitting in savings accounts because they're afraid to spend it or invest it, not because they're uninformed, not because they haven't heard of compound interest, but because the fear is more powerful than the logic. Because when your money is in cash, at least you still have it, and that feeling of having it is the thing the brain is actually protecting. There's a term in psychology for this kind of thinking. It's called the scarcity mindset. And Princeton researchers who studied groups across multiple countries found that people who perceived scarcity, regardless of whether that scarcity was real, consistently made short-term decisions that undermined their long-term goals. Because a brain operating under the psychology of scarcity prioritizes survival right now over optimization later. And keeping your money liquid, keeping it visible, keeping it accessible, that's the financial expression of that same survival logic. What's genuinely fascinating about this, though, is what it costs. Because here's the quiet irony that most people in this pattern never fully confront. The strategy designed to keep money safe is actually making it less safe over time. Inflation doesn't ask your permission. Every year that cash sits in a low-yield savings account, its purchasing power erodes. Consumer prices today are dramatically higher than they were just a few years ago, which means the discipline of saving without investing isn't preserving wealth. In many cases, it's slowly destroying it. The brain chose the feeling of safety over the reality of safety, and the two things are pointing in opposite directions. And Morningstar's research found something that reinforces this. Investors who sold out of positions during downturns and missed the subsequent rebounds lost roughly 1/5 of their potential returns over a 10-year period. The cost of avoiding risk wasn't avoiding loss. The cost of avoiding risk was the loss itself, just a slower, quieter version that never triggers the alarm. Now, consider something for a moment. Most people who explain why they don't invest will give you a very reasonable-sounding answer. They'll say they're waiting for the right time. They'll say the market is too unpredictable. They'll say they want to understand it better before they start. These explanations aren't lies. They genuinely believe them. But behavioral finance research consistently shows that these explanations are often post hoc rationalizations for a pre-existing emotional state. The decision to not invest was already made below the level of conscious thought, by a brain protecting itself from the feeling of potential loss. The reasons come after. Psychologists call this the illusion of control. Cash gives people a sense of agency over their financial future that investments feel like they don't. Because when you hold cash, you decide what happens to it. When you invest, the market decides. And for people whose psychology is built around the need for control, that difference isn't just practical, it's deeply emotional. Here's something the research keeps circling back to, though. The very traits that make someone a committed saver are not the enemy of building wealth. Discipline, consistency, delayed gratification, the ability to resist spending when others are spending, these are actually remarkable strengths. The issue isn't the character. The issue is that those strengths were wired to a protective pattern that stops just before the threshold where they would actually compound. The saving is real. The fear is real. The lost opportunity is also real. And maybe the most important thing about understanding this pattern is recognizing that it isn't a character flaw. It isn't laziness or stupidity or financial incompetence. In many cases, it's what a highly cautious, deeply responsible mind looks like when it's been shaped by experiences it couldn't control and hasn't fully processed. The challenge isn't to become reckless. It's not to suddenly throw every dollar into volatile assets and hope for the best. The challenge is something quieter and harder than that. It's learning to distinguish between the feeling of safety and the reality of it, between the comfort of holding and the mathematics of growing, between a nervous system responding to a threat that may have stopped existing years ago and a present-day financial life that might actually be stable enough to take a different kind of risk. And sometimes understanding where a pattern comes from is exactly where the possibility of changing it begins.